Working as a police motorway patrol officer in Portsmouth, England, I've had my fair share of odd and sometimes harrowing experiences. However, nothing could have prepared me for what happened on the evening of November 25th last year, an incident that still haunts me to this day. That night, our task was routine: set up a speed camera on a section of the motorway known for frequent speeding. It was around 6:30 p.m., and darkness had already engulfed the city, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp and the glow of our equipment in the patrol van. The first few hours were uneventful, just the typical speed checks. But as the night wore on, our equipment began to behave strangely. The speed trap, normally reliable, started picking up random tracings of what appeared to be non-existent objects hurtling past at speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour. This was unusual, to say the least, as these devices are known for their accuracy and seldom malfunction. Intrigued and a bit unnerved, we trained the camera directly on the road surface, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was triggering the system. What we saw next was beyond comprehension. On the small screen in the back of the patrol van, we observed what appeared to be human figures, visible only through the night vision filter. They were sprinting up and down the central reservation, the dividing surface between two opposite lanes on the motorway, about 40 feet from our vehicle. These figures were of average height, but had an eerie, silvery hue, moving with a speed and agility that seemed almost superhuman. The atmosphere in the van grew tense. None of us could believe what we were seeing. The figures kept appearing and disappearing, moving too fast for any normal human being. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, a mix of fear and fascination. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Only about 10 feet away from the van, one of these silvery entities suddenly appeared on the screen. It was a female figure standing approximately 6 feet tall, motionless and facing away from us. She was dressed in what looked like modern, albeit scanty clothing, not unlike what a young woman might wear on a night out. The detail was startling, from the shimmer of her attire to the outline of her hair. The fear I felt was paralyzing. I wanted to step out of the van to investigate, but my instincts screamed against it. Leaning out of the window, I saw nothing. The road was empty, no sign of the woman who stood so clearly on our screen. As the first vehicle since the sighting approached, the figures, including the woman, vanished from our screen. The road returned to normal, the night stillness resuming, as if nothing had happened. For the rest of my shift, which ended at 9 p.m., nothing out of the ordinary occurred, but the experience stayed with me, replaying over and over in my mind. When I mustered the courage to review the footage from the camera, I was met with another shock. There was no evidence of the figures or the woman. The tape showed only the empty, darkened road. I didn't report the incident, fearing it would sound too fantastical, too implausible. However, I couldn't keep it to myself and eventually shared it with a few close colleagues. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to concern, but none had experienced or heard of anything similar. The incident became a topic of hushed conversation. Speculation abound. Some suggested technical glitches or optical illusions, but none of these theories could satisfactorily explain what we saw. A few even whispered about urban legends and cryptids, suggesting we might have witnessed something paranormal, a phenomenon beyond our current understanding. To this day, I still patrol the same motorway, and each time I pass that particular stretch of road, a sense of unease washes over me. The memory of those silvery figures and the mysterious woman lingers, a reminder of the night when the boundaries of my reality were blurred. Working at a cheese factory on the outskirts of a small town in southwestern Minnesota was an experience filled with mundane routines and simple pleasures. The factory, a large, unassuming building, sat on the edge of an expansive cornfield that stretched far into the horizon. The summer of 2005 brought with it a heat wave so intense it became a topic of local legend. The heat was so oppressive that the milk, our lifeblood, delivered in large trucks, would evaporate before we could even process it. This unusual phenomenon made our workdays oddly easy. The lack of milk meant there was little for us to do. Yet, management insisted we come to work, so we spent our shifts idling, finding ways to entertain ourselves amidst the stagnancy. I was on the night shift, which suited me just fine. The nights brought a cool respite from the scorching daytime heat, and I enjoyed the quiet solitude it offered. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., a time when the world seemed to stand still, and I found myself out on the loading dock. The dock was a raised platform, a few feet off the ground, and it provided a perfect vantage point to watch the world go by. That night, I was captivated by the sight of bats darting around the floodlights, their silhouettes flickering against the light, like shadows dancing in the wind. The cornfield adjacent to the dock was in full bloom, the stalk standing tall, about as high as my shoulder, around 5'10". The sea of green was a comforting sight, one that had become familiar over my time at the factory. As I watched the bats, my gaze drifted to the edge of the cornfield. Something was there, moving in the shadows cast by the factory's lights. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. It was small, the size of a child, and extremely thin. Its skin was pale, almost luminescent in the dim light, and it had what looked like straight, black hair on its head. But it was the way it moved that caught my attention, in a jerky, disjointed manner, reminiscent of a stop-motion animation. It moved in segments: legs, then hips, torso, shoulders, neck, and finally, its head. It was an unsettling, mechanical motion, and it seemed to be looking back into the depths of the cornfield. A chill ran down my spine as I watched it. I had never seen anything like it. My initial thought was that it might be a heron or some other large bird, but it was too human-like despite its bizarre gait. However, its movements were anything but human. I watched, fascinated and horrified in equal measure as it gradually made its way towards me. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I edged closer to the brink of the dock. With each step, my heart pounded louder in my chest. When I was only a few feet from the edge, the creature stopped and turned its head towards me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I felt an overwhelming sense of paralysis. I could have, should have, run, but I was caught in a trance, my body refusing to respond to my screaming mind. The creature resumed its disjointed movement, its face still pointed directly at me. It continued its eerie dance, moving back towards the cornfield. As it reached the edge, it disappeared into the stalks. I strained my eyes, trying to follow its path through the corn, but there was no movement, no sign that it had ever been there. The night was silent, the usual chorus of crickets eerily absent. I remained on the dock for what felt like an eternity, waiting, watching, but it never reappeared. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the image of the creature from my mind, its haunting presence lingering like a specter. Driving down a desolate New Mexico road at 1 a.m. wasn't how I had planned to spend my Saturday night. But there I was behind the wheel, with my daughter, Maya, asleep in the back seat. We were returning from her volleyball tournament. Exhausted from the day's excitement, we had decided against staying in a hotel, opting to make the long drive home instead. The road was a black ribbon cutting through the desert, illuminated only by our car's headlights. The night was eerily silent, save for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind against the car. I felt a mix of weariness and alertness, the kind that only comes from driving at such a late hour. Suddenly, a dark shape flashed in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. In the rearview mirror, I saw Maya stir, mumbled something in her half-asleep state, and then settle back down. Concerned that I might have hit a dog, I quickly got out of the car, the night's chill hitting me like a wave. I walked around to the back, expecting the worst, but there was nothing. No sign of an animal, no damage to the car. Confused, I scanned the sides of the road, my eyes struggling to pierce the darkness. That's when I saw him, a man standing a few feet away holding his leg as if injured. My initial relief at not having hit a dog quickly turned to apprehension. "Are you all right?" I called out, my voice tinged with worry. He didn't respond, just stood there looking at me. His face was obscured by the night, his figure a dark silhouette against the inky backdrop. The stillness of the night seemed to intensify around him. Something about the man felt off. He didn't seem to be in pain, despite holding his leg, and there was an unsettling aura about him, a presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and limped down the road, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why was he out here in the middle of nowhere? And most importantly, what had I seen dart in front of the car? Shaken, I hurried back to the car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. I glanced back at Maya, relieved to see she was still asleep, unaware of the strange encounter. I started the car and continued down the road, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man again. The rest of the drive was spent in a state of heightened alertness. My mind kept replaying the incident, trying to rationalize what I had seen. The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that what had run in front of the car was not a man. It had moved too fast, too fluidly, and the figure I had seen standing by the road, there was something unnatural about him. I remembered reading about skinwalkers, a part of Native American folklore, particularly among the Navajo. They were said to be evil witches with the ability to transform into animal. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Could I have encountered a skinwalker? Or was it some other cryptid, a creature of the night that roamed the deserts of New Mexico? As we neared home, the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, casting a soft glow over the landscape. The eerie feeling that had gripped me began to fade, replaced by a sense of relief. We were almost home, almost safe. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the ground. I looked at our house, a familiar and comforting sight, and then back at the road we had just traveled. The events of the night felt like a distant dream, surreal and unsettling. I never did find out what I saw that night. No reports of missing persons, no strange occurrences in the area. But the memory of that dark shape darting in front of the car and the man by the roadside stayed with me. It was a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, some of which are better left unexplored. I've always been an avid hiker, drawn to the solitude and challenge of the mountains. My passion led me to Ben Macdui, the second highest peak in Scotland. I had read about its breathtaking views and challenging terrain, but I was unaware of its darker legends. It was a crisp morning in late October when I set out. The climb was taxing but invigorating. Reaching the summit filled me with a sense of triumph. The vast expanse of the Cairngorm stretched before me, a tapestry of wild, untamed beauty. I lingered at the top, savoring the solitude and the harsh, windswept landscape. As the afternoon waned, I began my descent. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the rocky paths and heather-clad slopes. It was then that I first heard it, a crunching sound like heavy footsteps, distinct from the natural noises of the mountain. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but a glance around revealed no one. The sound persisted, a rhythmic crunch that seemed to keep pace with me. I quickened my steps, unease blossoming into fear. The crunching grew louder, as if something large was following me, its steps deliberate and heavy. Panic set in. The once familiar path now seemed alien, fraught with danger. I broke into a jog, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of the wind, every shifting shadow made me jump. The footsteps grew louder, closer, as if whatever was behind me was gaining ground. I dared not look back, my mind conjuring images of a towering, shadowy figure looming in the fading light. I remembered tales of hikers lost in these mountains, their fates a mystery, and I feared becoming one of them. The terrain grew more treacherous as I descended, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The crunching was relentless, a constant reminder of the presence trailing me. I stumbled over rocks, my only thought to put as much distance between me and my unseen pursuer. As night began to fall, the mountain was enveloped in a suffocating darkness. I fumbled with my flashlight, its beam a small circle of light in the overwhelming blackness. The crunching sound was now accompanied by a low, guttural moan that seemed to carry on the wind, a sound both human and yet not. I thought of turning back, of confronting whatever was behind me, but fear rooted me to the spot. I felt an oppressive presence, as if the mountain itself was watching me, its ancient and inscrutable gaze focused on my insignificant form. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed forward, the beam of my flashlight dancing wildly as I navigated the rocky path. The sounds behind me grew more erratic, a series of crunches followed by silence, then a sudden, heart-stopping burst of noise. Finally, the lights of the base camp came into view, a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness. I stumbled into the camp, my relief palpable. The camp was deserted, the other hikers having descended earlier. I collapsed near the fire pit, my body trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I spent a restless night in my tent, the sounds of the mountain a constant reminder of my harrowing descent. As dawn broke, I packed up quickly, eager to leave Ben Macdui and its secrets behind. Back home, my curiosity got the better of me. I researched the mountain and stumbled upon the legend of the Big Gray Man, accounts of a tall, shadowy figure stalking the slopes of Ben Macdui, its presence marked by a sense of overwhelming dread. Some described it as a physical entity, others as a formless mist, but all spoke of the fear it invoked. The stories mirrored my experience, the unseen follower, the oppressive atmosphere, the feeling of being watched. I realized then that I'd encountered something unexplainable, something that transcended the natural world. The memory of that day still haunts me. I've continued to hike, to explore the wild places of the world, but I've never returned to Ben Macdui. The mountain holds a mystery, one that I'm content to leave unsolved.